That maneuver, what happens is that the fighter jet performs the moves that it would if it was going to fire a missile. So it flies up, I believe it flies up higher and very fast, and then it does a very sharp turn, which is the moment where it would fire the missile. Now, that can only go wrong if your missile is armed and you accidentally press to fire it.
Hello and welcome to Times Radio. I'm Arjuna Keshwani-Ham, and today we're speaking to Richard Lloyd Parry, the Asia editor at The Times. Richard, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
On Monday, you reported that Chinese fighter jets performed simulated missile attacks on a British warship, the frigate HMS Richmond, as it passed through the Taiwan Strait. The Richmond was the object, you wrote, of constructive kills by the Chinese, which is when a fighter jet performs the maneuvers necessary to launch an attack, but stops short, essentially, of launching a missile. Could you tell us how common these constructive kill drills are, what they mean, and has China launched constructive kill exercises on a British vessel before?
They are, I think, not uncommon in that part of the world and in similarly tense military situations in other parts of the world. It's not an attack, it's not launching a missile. It's essentially a kind of training for the pilots. But obviously it is a symbolically very aggressive thing to do. The Royal Navy officers on the HMS Prince of Wales, the British aircraft carrier, who I was talking to, were surprisingly, they weren't blasé about it, but they were sanguine about it. They said that they had been warned that this kind of thing could happen by American and Australian military people who they'd been consulting with before they went into the Strait, and also through the South China Sea afterwards. So it is the kind of thing that happens. It's not, an attack. Nobody really expected that these Chinese fast jets were going to launch a missile at a British warship, because that would have been an extraordinarily dangerous and escalatory thing to do, which wouldn't really serve China's interests either. But what it says is, look at this. We've got the kit, we've got the capacity. We can do this if we choose. And it's also, I suppose, an expression of disdain for this warship that China regards as intruding in its own waters.
And I'm wondering, on this constructive kill so-called drill, how high risk, I guess, is that sort of maneuver? Could you describe exactly what it is? And is there any opportunity for something like that going wrong? I mean, just with the precedent of the fact that just 2 weeks ago, there was a collision between a Chinese Coast Guard ship and a Chinese Navy ship, which reportedly led to the death of at least 2 Chinese sailors, an incident for which Beijing blamed dangerous maneuvers by Filipino Coast Guards. But if there is this context in which mistakes are being made and people are dying as a result of them, is there a chance that this kind of thing could escalate in a problematic way?
Well, around Scarborough Shoal, the confrontations between the Philippines Coast Guard and civilian ships and the Chinese Coast Guard are very, very physical. And as you say, there have been collisions between boats. A few months ago, a Philippines sailor, lost his thumb in one of those. So far, no one has been killed by the other side. If that was to happen, it would escalate things really quite seriously. But those are, relatively small boats. Coast Guard boats and civilian boats operating at close quarters, and it gets very nasty, and water cannons are used, and there are crashes and all that kind of thing. In the Straits of Taiwan, the situation with the British warship was very different. I mean, there you had a very large British warship, and these so-called constructive kills were being carried out by very fast, ultra-modern Chinese fighter jets. These are high-end pieces of military equipment with the extremely sophisticated sensors and weapon systems. And the Royal Navy officers I spoke to never told me they never at any point thought they were ever going to fire a missile. I mean, that maneuver, what happens is that the fighter jet performs the moves that it would if it was going to fire a missile. So it flies up, I believe it flies up higher and very fast. And then it does a very sharp turn, which is the moment where it would fire the missile. Now, that can only go wrong if your missile is armed and you accidentally press to fire it. And no well-trained fighter pilot is going to do that by accident. So the only question is, well, would they do that? Is there a motive to do that? And there really isn't any at the moment. It would be madness to do that. It would be an act of war, and it might well lead to war, which is something, as far as we've seen, that the Chinese government doesn't want at the moment any more than anyone else.
This development also comes in the backdrop of two very tense months between Beijing and Manila as a result of an intensified dispute over the Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. Might you attribute Beijing's performative drills on the UK vessels as some kind of signal? And might you even relate that to London's recent interest in this visiting troops pact with Manila, which was revealed by the Philippines defense chief recently?
Yeah, so I mean, all of this behavior is fairly consistent with the situation as it has unfolded over the past few years, and it's getting steadily more and more tense. This isn't a drastic escalation, but as you say, the lines are hardening, and the Philippines has clearly made its choice to align itself with the United States and its allies and friends, including the UK, and Taiwan. Has long been in that situation too. So I mean, these things are all interlinked in that sense. We're entering a situation that is feeling more and more like a kind of second Cold War, with the mainland China, the Communist Party of China, taking on the role that in the late 20th century was occupied by the Soviet Union. And the two sides are hardening their positions against one another. They're building up their defences and arming, at a really fast and alarming rate. And what's also happening is that small and medium-sized countries, like the Philippines, are being put in a position where they feel under pressure to choose one side or the other, just like the Cold War of the 20th century.
And with reference to these two ships, again, colliding, these two Chinese ships, Manila denied any responsibility for that. Has China intensified its claims and aggressions in recent months? And if so, why?
Yes, I mean, the whole situation has been intensifying for a few years now, certainly the last couple of years. And there was this collision. A Chinese naval vessel ran into one of their own Coast Guard ships and really battered it. I mean, you saw the photographs. They crushed the bow very badly, and they blamed the Filipinos for forcing that collision. Each side blames the other. It's quite difficult to know in any one individual encounter, who is actually to blame. But this is, I wouldn't say it's all that much worse now than it was 6 months ago. It's been pretty bad for a while now. And the fear is that, when there's a lot of physical stuff going on, that something really tragic could happen. There could be significant loss of life. And as I said, if one side kills someone on the other side, then things could escalate rather quickly. The Philippines and the United States have a long-established mutual defense treaty under which the US promises to defend the Philippines from aggression. Now, if a Chinese boat was to kill a Philippines sailor, then you could well claim that was an act of aggression. and it would be an alarming situation, and very difficult to know exactly what would happen next.
And as a response to Chinese aggression over the last 2 months or so, Manila has signed a new defense agreements with its partners. There was a landmark reciprocal access pact between the Philippines and Japan, which came into effect on the 11th of September, and which led to Japanese troops entering onto Philippine soil for the first time, I think, since World War II. And Manila also signed a similar military cooperation agreement with New Zealand this year, and already has sort of such agreements with Australia and the US. And an agreement is expected with Canada soon. What explains this sudden uptick in military cooperation between Manila and its partners? And is there a shift in the sort of is there any kind of shift happening here? And could all of this sort of combined help to successfully deter Chinese aggression and assertions in the South China Sea?
Yes, I mean, these agreements that you refer to are essentially technical agreements between countries about sending their people over there. I mean, one of the things it does is it allows, if the New Zealanders or the Japanese want to send troops over, it means that they can bring their own guns, their own equipment, through customs. It allows for that kind of thing. So it's not in itself a sort of stationing of troops or a formal military alliance or anything like that. It's quite a long way short of that. But it is significant, and what it shows is, as I said, that the Philippines has made its choice. When Ferdinand Marcos, the current president, was elected a few years ago, a lot of people thought at the time that he might incline towards China. His family had had fairly good relationships over the years with the Chinese government at a high level. But that has not happened. The opposite has happened. He's clearly decided that in order to defend the Philippines and protect its self-interest, he wants to throw his lot in with the US and the sort of Western in inverted commas nations that align itself with America.
And how do you see Washington's security posture in the South China Sea at the moment? We obviously had a call recently between Xi and Trump, where they've been trying to sort of negotiate a trade deal, and that came concurrent with Washington or Trump refusing to say whether he was going to continue with military aid to Taiwan in the future. Again, what are the implications of this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the broader relationship between the US and China and Trump and Xi, lies behind all this. I mean, under Donald Trump, I don't think the United States' broad strategic posture in East Asia has changed that much. Of course, everyone feels a lot less certain and confident of American commitments under Donald Trump, because he takes this very transactional approach. We're doing this, but we expect something in return from you, which didn't used to be the language that was used. And countries like Japan, even South Korea, are experiencing some of the nervousness and uncertainty that NATO countries have also had since Donald Trump came in. But, Donald Trump, for all his unpredictability, has not done anything or said anything serious to undermine the security treaties with Japan, South Korea, or the Philippines, which are the three big ones in East Asia. And, when this British frigate HMS Richmond went through the Strait the other week, it was accompanied by a US destroyer as well, and that's something the US has been doing for a while. So I think all of this may become clearer at the end of this month, beginning of November, when the so-called APEC summit of Asia-Pacific leaders is held in South Korea. And the signs are that Donald Trump is going to be at that. Not sure whether President Xi will be, we don't know that yet, but lots of other people will be, and it will be hosted by South Korea. The new Japanese Prime Minister, we don't know who that is going to be yet, will be there as well. So that's a time when Trump's words and the character and the tone of his meetings with people like that is going to be very important and give us some sense of what he's thinking about this part of the world.
And earlier this month, you reported on Vietnam's dramatic expansion of artificial land on reefs, shoals, and other features that it occupies in the also heavily disputed Spratley Islands of the South China Sea. And you cite a recent report from the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, or AMTI, which basically concludes that the rate of Hanoi's dredging and landfill activities, that with this rate, Vietnam will likely surpass the extent of China's own land reclamation and infrastructure build-up in the Spratley Islands. And you said that Hanoi might even be planning to build new military facilities. Could you expand on this a little bit more? It's really interesting and it hasn't been talked about too much.
No, it hasn't. A lot of attention has been given to what's called the militarisation of these features, these islands in the Spratley Islands by China. And there are, very dramatic before and after satellite photographs which show these little reefs. Some of them are barely above high tide, reefs, kind of sandbanks that China has concreted over and on which it has constructed military airstrips and bases, including storage areas for munitions, missiles, things like that. And it's basically turned them into kind of fixed aircraft carriers in the South China Sea. And this has been going on over the last, 10 years or so, and been, denounced by the Western powers and the other claimants to these islands. But what has got a lot less attention is that Vietnam is doing something very similar. And you're right, this report came out which scrutinized the satellite photographs and added up all the land areas and so on. And they concluded that Vietnam's reclaimed 70% of the land that China has. And if they keep going as they appear to be, they will soon surpass China. It looks as if they're not quite building as many runways as the Chinese, but they're certainly going to have at least one, of military grade, and they tend to get away with it. At least they face a lot less criticism than China, because Vietnam's government is, not as confrontational, as aggressive, or as powerful in the region.
And what has China's reaction been to this?
They've actually not reacted that much. It's interesting to see. So with the Philippines, they're very reactive and very outspoken, and there's a lot of exchanging of very bad-tempered diplomatic communiques over Scarborough Shoal, for example, the one that Philippines and China both claim. But they kind of let the Vietnamese get on with this. That may partly be because Vietnam, like China, is officially a communist state, and they have a kind of communist solidarity, going back to the days of the Cold War and the 20th century. But evidently they don't mind as much as they do about the Philippines. And that may also be because the Philippines has aligned itself so closely to the US. And perhaps they see it as a kind of proxy for their struggle with the United States.
And I guess if this continues to increase and Vietnam continues with these land reclamation projects in the future, is there a chance that tensions between China and Vietnam could escalate, or does, as you say, China simply view Vietnam as more aligned with itself, more of a proxy, and is almost hoping to bring Vietnam more into its own orbit?
Vietnam and China historically have had very bad relations. The last time China fought a war, most people have forgotten this, was, I think it was in 1978, when they had a rather nasty, fairly short but violent border war with Vietnam, where they got a kind of bloody nose from the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese saw them off. So, tensions are never far away between those two countries. And yes, it could very well flare up. I mean, there have been confrontations in the past, not recently, but a few years ago, over an area of sea where that there may be energy resources, oil and natural gas under the seabed. And there were exchanges of fire between Vietnamese and Chinese ships, and I think a number of Vietnamese sailors lost their life then. So it's another one to watch.
That'll be a really interesting one to watch as well. Thanks, Richard. That's fantastic.